Our speaker tonight has written a number of books. He's loved and he's hated. I love him. Now, with that said, for a number of years, starting in '63, Robert, he would stand on Elm Street, and he had a little booth, and he would sell books. And what he believed, the evidence he's gathered at that time, and he's gathered lots more evidence since then, and he's still gathering evidence. He hadn't stopped. And he's been arrested how many times? 77 times?
I was arrested twice, but ticketed 84.
Ticketed 84 times. And is it true that the last time that you were brought before the magistrate, he told the city of Dallas, quit this or I'll put you in jail yourself?
What he actually said was that what they're doing to me was violation of First Amendment rights, and it was federal. And he said we should go and sue in federal court, which we did. It took 7 years, but we won.
There you go. So don't mess with him. And one reason it caught my attention, his attorney, I barely knew in college. I went to Austin College, but anytime I see somebody who's gone to Austin College in the paper, I want to read about them. And his name was Brad Gazaya. We were never friends, but he was kind of a quiet guy in college. Man, I didn't realize he was mean at the courthouse. Anyways, it is my honor to introduce Robert Groden.
Thank you, Tom. Folks, it's now been almost 58 years since President Kennedy was killed. Next week will be 50th anniversary. I've been doing this now since the time it happened, and I started when I was 18 years old. The president was killed on my 18th birthday, and I started studying it right away and collecting everything I could. And in 1975, I appeared on a TV show called Good Night America with Geraldo Rivera and Dick Gregory. And I released the film of the assassination, which you'll be seeing in a little bit, on that particular show. Very soon thereafter, I was invited to Washington, D.C. to present the evidence before the House of Representatives. I did, and within days, the case was reopened. And that's the history of it. It's my little place in history, I guess, but I'm glad I was able to do it. I would do it again. Fortunately, several years ago, my wife Janet, who's sitting right there, we met in Dealey Plaza, where the president was shot. And 2 years ago, we were married in Dealey Plaza, which was a terrific situation. Anyway, the assassination has been a major part of my life now for 58 years. And what I'm going to show you here is some of the key photographic evidence in the case. We do have a new book in the back, which has 1,000 photographs in it, many of which have never been released before. But let's give it a try. That's the new book. It's called JFK Absolute Proof. And as I said, it's got 1,000 pictures colored throughout. President Kennedy went to Texas in November of 1963 to cement relations within the state's Democratic Party. It was completely splintered, and he tried to bring everybody together. That's why he came down. This was the first trip he did on his re-election campaign. The morning of the assassination, he was in Fort Worth, and he gave a speech in the parking lot of the Texas Theater. And here he is with Governor John Connally, Senator Ralph Yarborough, and Vice President Lyndon Johnson. And here he is finishing up his speech before he went in to address an overflow crowd indoors. And there's Johnson on the right. Question is, would you buy a used car from that man? He then flew an 8-minute flight from Fort Worth to Dallas, and he went to Love Field, and here he is at Love Field being greeted by the crowd. Mrs. Kennedy in her famous pink outfit. Then the president got into the rear of the Lincoln limousine with Mrs. Kennedy, and sitting directly in front of him was Governor Connolly. This is their positions in the car. Now, so the first thing that really started happening that is really questionable is the Secret Service agent, Donald Lawson, who was supposed to be riding directly behind the president, was told to stay behind, and he had no idea what was going to happen. He was absolutely confused, and he wanted to know why, but I don't think he ever found out. He's the one who would have jumped on the back of the car to protect the president when the shooting started. He wasn't there. Down Main Street, the crowds were as many as 12 to 15 deep, and they were very, very friendly toward the president. Then he entered Dealey Plaza. If you've never been to Dealey Plaza, it's a small park-like area. It's from north to south, it's 2 blocks wide, and from east to west, it's 1 block. Here we see the president entering the plaza. Let's see if I can get this. There he is, right there. And this is the Texas School Book Depository building. This is the window that Lee Harvey Oswald is supposed to be in at this time. Now, this is the plaza. For those of you who are not familiar with it, the car entered here on Main Street, headed north for 1 block on Houston Street, and then down Elm Street. The shooting started about here and ended here. This is the area known as the Grassy Knoll. This is the Triple Underpass. There's the underpass. This is the Grassy Knoll. This is Elm Street. You can see there's an S-curve to it. And this is where the shooting began, right about here, and ended right about here. This is the moment of the shooting. The president has heard the first shot and is now looking toward the Grassy Knoll. There's the area here. The man who took the Zapruder film, Abraham Zapruder, is standing right here with his secretary, Marilyn Sitzman. Now, this is the actual assassination. These are the lead motorcycles turning into Dealey Plaza. There's the president's car turning onto Houston Street.
Now turning on to Houston Street, heading for the corner of Elm Street, and the crowds are just beginning to thin out.
The car heads north for 1 block on Houston Street to the corner of Elm. Now, this film was taken from the 4th floor of the depository as the president's car approached. This is the shot that would have been taken if you're not waiting for crossfire.
The president's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark. I was on Simmons Freeway earlier, and even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators waiting their chance to see the president as he made his way toward the trademark.
Here he is in front of the depository. Now, this is a compilation of films taken in Dealey Plaza. And I released every one of these. The government had them all, and they never released any of them.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route. Stand by.
Notice everybody's running to the front, to the grassy knoll.
There's numerous people running up the hill alongside Elm Street, there by the Simmons Freeway. Several police officers are rushing up the hill at this time. Stand by. Just a moment, please. Something has happened in the motorcade route. Stand by, please.
After the assassination, President Johnson was sworn in on Air Force One. Mrs. Kennedy was made to be there for the Kodak moment. Johnson, after he finished being sworn in, turned to his friend, Congressman Thomas, and the two of them were looking and smiling at each other and winking. It's called the wink photograph. This was part of an entire series of photographs that were taken on the plane, but on the original strip, this particular frame was cut out. 10 months later, Lyndon Johnson received the Warren Report, the original copy of the Warren Report from Earl Warren, and his sole comment was, "It's awful heavy." The Warren Report said that this man, Lee Harvey Oswald, a 24-year-old ex-Marine, fired all of the shots that killed the president and wounded Governor Connally. And they created something called the single bullet theory. I have another name for it, but mixed company, I'm not going to say what it was. It sounds like single bullet theory. This is it. The bullet was supposed to have come down from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, hitting President Kennedy, according to them, in the back of the neck. Of course, it wasn't. It was farther down in the back. The bullet exited his throat, then made a zigzag turn to hit Governor Connally in the right shoulder by the armpit. The bullet exited his chest, made a right-hand turn to hit his right wrist, and then made a U-turn to bury itself into his left thigh. This is the single bullet theory. Now here's the president and Governor Connally as they were sitting in the exact position at the moment of the first shot. Now the little black arrows I put there show where the president and Governor Connally were actually hit. Now there's a problem for them, and the problem is this. With the bullet coming down from the 6th floor of the depository, hitting the president in the back here, and going on to hit Governor Connally at this point, there is no way that that bullet could have gone through the president's throat, where there was a wound. This is the bullet that is supposed to have caused 7 separate wounds in 2 grown men. It's virtually pristine. It could almost be fired again. They call it the magic bullet or the single bullet. I call it single bullshit theory. But the man on the right is Arlen Specter, Senator Specter, now for a while after that point, now deceased. Senator Specter came up with the idea called the single bullet theory, and that is that the bullet hit President Kennedy first and then hit Governor Connally. The problem is that in order for the bullet to come out of his throat, as I just mentioned a moment ago, right here, the bullet has to enter his back way below the shoulder. This became part of the single bullet theory. Specter created something which I call the verbal plastic surgery. Moved the bullet from this point here, where it really went in, up to here to the back of his neck. Now, the bullet hitting the president on a right-to-left trajectory, based on where the actual wounds were, would miss Governor Connolly completely because he was sitting directly in front of the president. So what did they do? Years later, they came up with this theory that actually Governor Connolly was sitting inboard between the two seats. It's ridiculous, but that's what they said in order to make it fit. This is a model of the actual car itself, and you can see that the Connolly seat is directly in front of the president. He was not sitting here. This is a reconstruction and shows the president and Governor Connolly sitting directly in front of each other there. Now, the first bullet that hit anybody hit President Kennedy in the throat from the front, right here. Now, at this point, the shot is being fired and it hasn't hit the president in the throat yet. But he hears the first shot, and his hand starts to drop, and he disappears behind the road sign. And upon reemergence from behind the sign, he has been hit, and his arm starts to come up toward his throat. Now here's where the president was shot in the throat. I took the actual autopsy photograph and I eliminated the tracheotomy, and this is what the president looked like when he was originally shot. This is after the tracheotomy. It was utilized, Dr. Perry utilized it to create a wound in the throat to insert a tracheal tube. The exit from the throat wound exited in the president's back up here at that point. Now, President Kennedy was hit in the back as well, exactly 2 seconds after the throat shot. At this point here, the president has clearly been hit. Now, Governor Connolly has not been hit. According to the single bullet theory, by now both men have been hit. The thing is, Governor Connolly in his right wrist is holding, in his right hand, he's holding this Texas-style Stetson hat. He could not possibly have done this after he was hit in the wrist because the distal end of the radius bone was fractured. And here's where he was actually hit. If you look at his shoulder, you see how his shoulder drops? His cheeks puff out, his hair becomes disheveled. Way after the president has already responded to the shot. Clearly, there were two separate shots. The single bullet theory was a joke. This is where Governor Connolly was hit in the back. This point here. I'm sorry, this is where President Kennedy was hit in the back. The bullet hit him at this point here, but that was the second bullet that hit him. There's the bullet hole in the back of his shirt. And this is the autopsy face sheet, from the autopsy face sheet, and it shows the exact spot where the president was hit. In the back, not in the back of the neck. He was hit too low for the bullet to have come from the 6th floor and exited the president's throat. This is the president's autopsy stating that a second wound occurred in the posterior back at about the level of the third thoracic vertebra. This is pretty accurate to the exact spot. In a man of President Kennedy's size, this would be about 6 or 7 inches below the shoulder line. And there's the entrance wound in his back, 2 inches below where the first bullet exited. 2 separate shots, 2 separate directions, therefore a conspiracy. 2 FBI agents, Frank O'Neill and James Siebert, testified that the bullet was recovered from the body of the president. Now, this could not have happened if the bullet had gone through him and hit Governor Connolly. None of it makes any sense, but they stuck with the single bullet theory. Now, here's where Governor Connolly was hit in the back. At this point here, he has not yet been hit. But here's where he is hit. Notice his cheeks have started to puff out, his hair becomes disheveled, and his shoulder drops. It's really a marked point where his shoulder drops at this point here. This is where the governor was hit. He was actually suffered several shots, but the single bullet theory says that he was hit in the shoulder here. The bullet exited his chest here by the right nipple. The bullet then went through his right wrist and buried itself into his left thigh. One bullet after it struck President Kennedy. This is the single bullet theory. This is actually where Governor Connally was hit. He was out by the right armpit. That's where it exited his chest. And then went on to hit his wrist, his right wrist at this point here. He was holding that Texas Stetson hat in his hand. At this point, he is still holding it. This is way after both men were supposed to have been hit. He's still holding the hat in his hand. Notice there's no blood at all on his wrist. The wrist was shattered. It would have been soaked with blood by now, which shows he was actually hit by a separate bullet in the wrist. And then he's pushed downward and forward. What you're seeing is actually from the Zapruder film, and it's the exact situation that happened during the actual shooting. From Governor Connally's wrist, this was one of the many fragments that were removed from the wrist, and it weighs more than the total weight missing from the so-called magic bullet. Here's where he was hit in the thigh, above the knee. 4 hours later, this bullet was still in Governor Connally's leg, and the so-called magic bullet was on Air Force One on its way back to Washington, D.C. Okay, this is the fatal headshot. This is what killed President Kennedy. This is frame 312 of the Zapruder film. This is 313, the moment that the fatal shot struck him in the right temporal area and threw him to the rear and to the left. If he'd have been shot from behind, he would have been thrown forward. It's called transfer of momentum. Newton's third law of motion tells us this. Note, bullet entrance wounds are always the size of a bullet, and exit wounds are always larger, usually much larger. Where were the actual wounds in President Kennedy's head? I spoke with several witnesses to the assassination and to the life-saving efforts in the autopsy. And every single one of them said that the exit wound was in the back of the president's head. What we have here is several of the witnesses in Dealey Plaza, again saying that the fatal wound was in the back of the head. And now the doctors from Parkman Hospital, which I interviewed, again, they all said exactly the same thing, that the exit wound was in the back of the head. They were consistent. All in all, 88 witnesses said that the bullet exited in the rear, a bullet entering from the front, which means it did not come from the book depository. This is Robert Knudsen. He was the autopsy photographer, one of the several photographers, and he testified before the House Assassinations Committee that the fatal wound came from the front, exited the rear, and that the autopsy photographs shown to him at the time were not legitimate. Dr. Robert McClelland in 1966 drew this picture for Josiah Thompson in his classic book, 6 Seconds in Dallas. This was extremely important. I know that Dr. McClelland spoke here. He was a great man, and I had the honor of portraying him in the movie JFK. In all, 88 medical witnesses to the rear exit wound of President Kennedy's head in addition to the many witnesses in Dealey Plaza, every single witness, I repeat, every single witness said to the head wounds, testified that the wound was in the rear of the president's skull. Now, these are two very, very graphic and very disturbing photographs of the president's head. I'm going to show you. If you're upset by this sort of thing, please don't look at it. This is where the bullet entered the president's head in the right temporal area, right here, and blew out the back of his head, back here. There's the throat wound. This is a rear of the head, as described by all the doctors. This is a CGI version of it that I made from the original photograph. And this is what the doctors all said was the way the president's head looked. They all said that the autopsy photographs, which I showed them, which are the ones that were reviewed by the House Assassinations Committee, were inaccurate. Now, this is the president at frame 312. You see the back of his head is relatively flat, all things considered. And this is frame 335 of the Zapruder film, which shows the exit wound in the back of the head. There's the exit wound again. The hole is back here in the rear of the skull, and the hair is being driven up the avulsed exit wound in the back of the president's head. The Nix film, taken from the other side of the street, at the moment of the explosion, there's part of the president's head in the explosion. There's a piece of his head being blasted to the rear. Here you can see the total difference in the back of the president's head. There's the explosion to his head. This is a piece of the president's skull. It's called the Harper fragment. It was found 54 feet to the rear of from where the president was shot. It's 3.5 inches wide. Mrs. Kennedy, immediately after the shooting in shot, climbed out of the trunk of the car and picked up a piece of the president's head called the Delta fragment, which is back here. She brought it back into the car and carried it all the way to Parkland Hospital and gave it to one of the doctors and said, "Will this help?" Now, 6 shots missed completely. These were ignored by the Warren Commission. This is one that a witness named Jean Newman told me about. She said she was actually standing over here on the north curb. But here, at this point here, there's Phil Willis taking his picture. And there's nothing wrong with this street at all. And then 1/18 of a frame later, you can see the result of a bullet actually striking the street right there. And then the following frame, 1/18 of a second later, the residue was lying in the street. I asked Miss Newman, I said, where did the bullet come from? She said, well, the residue went to the rear, so the shot came from the front. This is the president's car during the shooting. After the first volley of shots, there's no damage at all to the president's windshield. But a few seconds later, the sun is reflecting off of a bit of damage to the windshield right here. That's a shot which missed. And around that time, too, another bullet hit the chrome over the windshield from behind. Another one hit by the manhole cover across the street from where Zapruder was standing, and it hit the cement. If you've been to the plaza or if you're planning on going, that bullet mark is still there to this day. That's what it looked like when I photographed it in 1971. A man identified as an FBI agent came in, picked up the bullet that was found in the grass, had it in his hand, and put it into his pocket. And that's the last time we see it. It's never been turned into as evidence. That's the bullet mark. As you can see, it did not come from the depository. The depository is over here. This came from the roof of the Dallas Records building right there. Another one struck the south curb of Main Street. That's where the bullet hit, and it caused fragments of the bullet and the curb itself to fly up and hit this man, James Tague, on the cheek. Here he is just a few moments later. That's where the bullet hit him. Another one hit the sidewalk in front of the book depository on the north side of Elm Street. And it did not come from the depository window where Oswald was supposed to be. It came from the other end here. This picture was taken by an Army intelligence officer named James Powell about 30 seconds after the shooting. And it shows the 6th floor window Oswald was supposed to be in. And he's not there, but somebody else is. Here it is again. There's the window. These are the boxes in the window. And just beside the box, you can see the shape of a leg. Right there. That's not one of the boxes. These are the boxes. There is somebody still in that window. But when this picture was taken, Lee Oswald was on the 2nd floor talking to a woman named Geraldine Reed, getting change for the Coca-Cola machine. This was Oswald's alibi. They couldn't bring this stuff in court, so that's why they had to kill him. There it is again. There's the box, and he's gone by now. This is sometime well after that point. These are the boxes in the window. This is the alleged sniper's nest. One of the problems is there's not enough room here for anybody to actually be in if they're shooting left-handed or right-handed, either way. This is a steam pipe that is blocking that particular point. Now, this picture was taken by a Dallas Morning News photographer, and that's the so-called Oswald window. This woman here on the 4th floor is taking a film of the assassination at this time. When I worked for the House Assassinations Committee one Sunday morning, I saw that there was a whole pile of photographs, negatives, things of that nature. And I asked if I could take a look at them. They said, sure. That was my job anyway. And I found this original negative. Now, every time this picture had ever been published, starting that day, all of this was cropped out. This part here was not shown. The round window is the last one that you see. The square one is not seen. I looked at this, I saw that it showed in the window, it showed in the negative, and they let me borrow it, and I blew it up and found that there actually is somebody else in the window on the 6th floor. This white spot here is a light on the ceiling behind him, and there's his head, hairline, cheeks, his chin. And messing with it by changing the contrast, you can see more detail in his eyes, his nose, his mouth. He's wearing a white T-shirt, and there's the light on the ceiling behind him. The entire 6th floor of the depository is one room. If somebody was in the so-called Oswald window, he's in the same window as this guy, and each one would know about the other. However, when those pictures were taken, Lee was on the 2nd floor in the snack room buying the Coca-Cola. He was seen there just 72 seconds after the shooting. There's no way in the world he could get down because 2 women, Sandra Stiles and Victoria Adams, were walking down the stairs and nobody passed them. Now here's Oswald being arrested at the Texas Theater. There's Oswald right there. He's being thrown into an unmarked police car and taken in for questioning. As you will see later on after the presentation, I have a very rare thing back there. I actually have pictures, not pictures, I actually have tickets from the Texas Theater from 1963. I'll show you those. Now that night at midnight, Jack Ruby was about to enter history. Here he is in the back of the questioning, the midnight press conference, and he is stalking Oswald. Here he is on Sunday morning. That's him. He races through the crowd, shoots Oswald, silencing the man accused of shooting the president and preventing there from being a trial. Now, Oswald was framed. How was he framed? Well, several ways, but one of them was this. These two pictures were found in Ruth Paine's garage. Ruth Paine was a woman who lived in Oak Cliff, and she had owned the house where Oswald's wife Marina was staying. These two pictures were found in the garage, and they're fakes. They're total fakes. Oswald himself said they were. He said, "That's my face, but not my body." If you look here, you don't have to look very carefully, but there, you see the crop line through the center of the chin? That's where Oswald's face up here was pasted on someone else's body. There's the crop line through the chin. When I brought this up to the House Assassinations Committee, they said, "Oh, it's just facial acne." Now here's Oswald under arrest. You see he has a pointed chin with a cleft in it. The man in the photograph, the two backyard photographs, has a square chin, no cleft. There's quite a difference. So for years I've been referring to this as the world's first chin transplant. A great many witnesses, about 80% of the witnesses, said that they were aware of shots or a shot from the grassy knoll, which was the right front of the president. There's the Zapruder standing there taking the film. There's the president, and here's the grassy knoll. There's the stockade fence on top of the knoll. And this dark shape here, right beside the tree, is actually the man who fired the fatal shot. Immediately after the shooting, about 400 witnesses ran up the grassy knoll, chasing the assassin. Now, the House Assassinations Committee came up with something no one had ever done before. They did acoustic testing of shots from the grassy knoll based on a Dallas police tape that was made by this man, H.B. McLean. McLean's microphone on his motorcycle stuck open, and he recorded the sounds of the shots. This is the testing that the House Committee did from the sixth floor window and from the stockade fence. And the answer to the testing was that a spot 8 feet to the west of the corner of the stockade fence, right here by the tree, is where the fatal shot came from. This picture was taken at the exact moment. There's the shape, there's the tree. Once again, this is the whole area of the grassy knoll at the exact moment of the fatal headshot. And there's the shape again, right by the tree. Now, when the acoustics scientists gave their report to the House Assassinations Committee, they did not know that this photograph even existed. I was there when they testified, and I showed it to them right afterwards. They couldn't believe that they had this kind of proof backing up their theory. This is a document, CIA document 1035-960. And 1035-960 shows the CIA's war against researchers in the critical community, such as myself. Blow it up, it says that the CIA and others that were being paid by them should employ propaganda assets to answer and refute the attacks of the critics, like myself. It shows that they say we're in it for the money, we're tied into our own theories, and blah, blah, blah. But they actually had a formal policy of dealing with people like me. Now, we have seen on TV several documentaries, I call them mockumentaries, because they misrepresent the evidence. This is the reality. This is the Zapruder film at the exact moment of the fatal shot. 1/18th of a second later, the head explodes. When the mockumentary was done, they put Mrs. Kennedy's head behind the president, and then the caption, the verbal caption on it says, if the shot had come from the knoll, we would have had a dead Mrs. Kennedy. But that's not where she was sitting. I told them that, and they told me to mind my own business. I told them this is my business. The book Absolute Proof, which we have back there, is my newest book on the assassinations, my 8th one. And the book has 1,000 photographs in it, color throughout. The concept was to create an archive of the photographic evidence in the case. The Kennedy assassination is the most photographed crime of any type in the history of mankind. In the book, I have stuff which was just discovered. One of the doctors at the life-saving efforts of Lee Oswald took pictures, took 9 rolls of film, and they were confiscated and held aside for over 40 years. The film was kept in very hot areas in Florida and very humid. The film itself was virtually unusable. I was given the 9 rolls of film. I took them to the only processing lab in the country that still processes that old, outdated film. When we got the film back from the machine, there was nothing that you could see with the naked eye. It was just all black. I came up with the idea of using a chemical called Farmer's Reducer to eliminate a lot of the black, and this is what we ended up with. 88 pictures usable of showing Oswald's last moments. Now, this may not work because the other one didn't work either, but this is the second head wound. This is what was discovered and is in the book for the first time. At this point here, the president has already been hit in the head. He's responding to that first shot at this point. And he's hit again in the second head a second time, and the blood brain material were being blown out of the front of his head. You see here Mrs. Kennedy's black collar, and here much of the collar you can't see because of the blood. There it is. Go back again. As it comes out, there were 2 headshots, first from the front, second from behind, 0.7 of a second later. See how it comes out? The president's brain, as you may be aware, was missing for a lot of years. In 1966, they looked for it, couldn't find it. It was just gone from the National Archives. Nobody knew what happened to it. When I worked for the government, I found in the National Archives photographs, which are all in the book, showing where the president's brain was. It was in this box. Inside the box is a stainless steel container with the president's brain. And here they are putting it in the ground when they reburied the president at the final resting place in Arlington National Cemetery. When I worked for the House Committee, I found a 2.5-page document which we call the smoking gun document. This was written by the head of the Secret Service, the head of the CIA to the head of the Secret Service, and it says, among other things, that Oswald was trained by the CIA. It's 2.5 pages long, and it's signed by John McCone, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. It says that Oswald, let's see if I can read it from back here. Oswald's subject was trained by this agency under cover of the Office of Naval Intelligence. And on it goes to say how we sent him to the Soviet Union, that he was not a defector. It goes on and on. This is a very important document, and this is published in the book for the first time. What really happened to President Kennedy? We may never know it all. We know a lot more than the government ever wanted us to. And as I've said several times through the decades, may all the truth be known. It may be too late for justice in this case, but it's never too late for the truth. Thank you.
He and I are two of the very few people who ever interviewed Dr. Malcolm Perry. And I interviewed him there at the St. Paul Hospital in 2002 or somewhere in that neighborhood, 2003. And I wanted to see if and you're seeing this for the first time, we hadn't practiced this. I want to make sure my recollection and your recollection are similar. First of all, he grew up here in Allen. That's why I had an entree into his office. It's not because I was a JFK historian, but there was one rule, and this is why it's kind of confusing to me. No notes, no recorders, and no photographs.
That's what he said to me too. Would not allow it.
And of course, when you're writing something, I cannot tell you how important it is to take notes, because your memory in 30 minutes now, what did he say? I mean, and I have a good memory, but he told me the first thing he learned in med school, in ER training, stop the bleeding and start the breathing. And for a split second, he thought there was, I think, a team of 8 or 10, 12 doctors there around the president. And they all had a specific task. And he thought for a brief second, he could save the life of the president, because that bullet in the neck had miraculously avoided the carotid artery and the spinal column, and he had done a number of what they call Saturday night killings, because he was one of the young docs. He got the Saturday night specials, they called them. And so he had done a lot of emergency work on the neck in his career, and he found it miraculous and so he had said that if it hadn't been for the other bullet or more, that he thought the president's life could be saved. And so he started to do what he did best, was to clear the throat so he could start the breathing and then stop the bleeding. But then shortly after the tracheotomy, he said that, I believe Dr. McClellan said, "Mac, this is massive over on the other side." Can you comment on that?
Well, Dr. McClellan, who was a friend of mine, I actually got to play him in the movie JFK, was one of the doctors who saw the exit wound, was very, very open about it, actually started speaking about it before any of the others. And when I interviewed Dr. Perry, it was at New York Hospital in 1988, I think. And I showed him the autopsy photographs for the first time. He had never seen them. And he was standing up at his desk, and he said, "I didn't do that. That's a butcher job." And I wish like heck that he'd have allowed us to record it, but he wouldn't. He had said at the time of the assassination that the fatal shot came from the front, and he never changed his mind about that. He told me that the shot came from the front.
This is where I'm going to ask some tough questions. The standalone theory people argue that the sewer lines, a lot of the conspiracy theories argue that that some of the shooters came up through the sewer lines. And the standalone folks say there's no way a human being, the sewer lines were not big enough for them to crawl in and out of. They weren't that big. Do you have any comment on that one?
Well, at the moment of the fatal shot, and I actually photographed it from inside the sewer, you cannot see the president where he was at the time of the fatal shot until 54 feet later. The shots could not have come from there. Escape would have been impossible because it's so thin. Maybe a jockey or a child could have gotten away, but somebody tried to prove that that happened and got stuck. They had to call the fire department to get him out.
So that eliminates the sewer possibilities.
There's all kinds of theories like that. The sewer shots, the thought that the driver turned around and shot the president. None of this stuff is true. The fatal shot did come from the front, from behind the stockade fence. What we did, and I didn't mention this before, Officer McLean had recorded the shots by accident. He didn't even know he had done it. I was called down to Washington to present and synchronize the Zapruder film with the acoustics tape, the actual recording. And we had found out that based on the computer analysis of echo patterns, that the fatal shot had come from 8 feet to the west of the corner of the stockade fence. Exactly there. And with a maximum possible error of 6 inches. Well, I showed just now pictures of the point where they said the shot came from. What I did is I synchronized the original Secret Service copy of the film, which had no splices in it, with the actual sound recording. And we found out that, in fact, the shots themselves were recorded. People who think that Oswald acted alone or state that Oswald acted alone ignore that completely. There's people who think that the fatal shots came from the South Knoll or the sewer, as you said, or other places too, in the trees or whatever. We know exactly where the fatal shot was fired from. There are other shots that were fired, such as the back shots and like that. We don't know exactly where they were fired from, since the likelihood is that at least 1 or 2 of the shots came from the so-called Oswald window. That's probably the case. But that could be wrong too. We just don't know. The shots from the front were synchronized by the acoustics tape and were found to come from that exact point. They didn't bother to do that from behind. They just assumed that all of the shots from behind came from the Oswald window. And the odds are very strong against that. Based on the rapidity of the shots and the directions, the odds are that they could not have come from the single shooter.
Now the big question is, okay, so from what I understand in your presentation, the most convincing evidence you have is the shooter from the records building, top of the records building, I believe, and behind the grassy knoll, behind the stockade. Now, is that correct?
Well, that's part of it, yes. Some years ago, a bullet shell was found on the roof of the records building. Some years ago, they were just taking up the old roofing, the tar paper, the flashing, all of that. And when they were taking it up, they lifted up the flashing and a bullet shell fell out from there. I obtained the bullet. I still have the original shell, and published pictures of that in in my magazine and my book.
Now that we've established that there's more than one shooter, who were they and why? Who hired them?
Well, the why is perhaps more important than the who right now. If you find out the why and can prove that, it'll tell you and give you the clues as to the who. We don't know. We do know. People ask me the question, have asked me this question for 58 years. Who killed President Kennedy? My answer is not Lee Harvey Oswald.
About 3 years ago, I witnessed, because I was there, probably one of the most acrimonious debates I ever witnessed about the assassination. And it was between the last living counsel for the Warren Commission. He's passed, everybody else has passed away except him. And Robert out of California, he lives in Arizona, but taught at Notre Dame.
Oh, Professor Blakey?
Yeah, Robert Blakey.
Professor Robert Blakey was the director of the House Assassinations Committee, the third one and the final one. I spoke to Professor Blakey a couple of times around 1970, 78. And I said, you don't believe the CIA is telling you the truth, do you? He says, I've worked with these people for over 20 years. You don't think they'd lie to me, do you? I said, yeah. As it turns out, he eventually found out when it was too late that they were lying to him. The CIA sent somebody to be the liaison between the House Committee and the CIA, back and forth. And the man they chose was a man named George Joannides. And Mr. Joannides had been in charge of the people that Oswald was allegedly with in New Orleans, people from Florida too. And they never told Blakey that this was in fact the guy. And he didn't find out about it until like a decade or so later. He then said he would never trust a single word the CIA ever told him.
President Eisenhower said that too.
Well, I have to take their word for it.
That's another story for another time. This debate was so acrimonious. It started out, Professor Blakey was trying to be civil and respectful to the other side. In fact, he started out the debate by saying, I want to honor my colleague for his intelligence and so forth. And the other guy said nothing. It was, most times when somebody, say we were in a debate and had the different point of view, and I started out with honoring your intelligence, and then the other would say, and I honor yours, and then you start your disagreement. But he said nothing. That was my first clue this was going to get hot. And so I went up to the guy, not Professor Blakey, and by the way, I've tried to get him here. I went up to the other guy, and I said, I want to know something about Oswald's last phone call on Saturday night, November 23rd, at about 10 o'clock. And I said, he called somebody in North Carolina. And what I want to know is why the Warren Commission did not address that phone call in very much detail. I would have wanted to know, first of all, I would have let if I had been there, I would have let them have their conversation so we could see what they were saying. But they let him call this person, and the second that the other person said hello, the secrets, whoever it was, FBI or what have you, ordered Mrs. Sweeney, who I worked with at the city of Dallas, to pull the phone. So we'd have no clue what the conversation would have entailed. Can you just address that, please?
We don't know much of the details of that. I'm glad you knew about that. What we do know is that the midnight press conference, Oswald was asked by one of the reporters, did you shoot the president? He says, no, I haven't shot anybody. He says, I've not been charged with that. And one of the reporters says, you have been charged. He was charged with killing the president. They didn't even tell him. So, Oswald at that point said, I do request someone to come forward and represent me. Yet he was denied his civil rights. He was denied the opportunity to have counsel. And then, of course, Sunday morning, Jack Ruby shot and killed him. So we say goodbye to the idea of a trial.
Now, one of the standard questions that, because I've had this, I try to be fair and intellectually honest and present all sides. But we had a man here one time, and he said that Ruby, if he had planned on killing Oswald, would not have left his beloved dog, and I'm a dog person, so I understand, because I have, I have people know I have a dog, so that if something happens, the dog's taken care of. He left the dog in the car, and they claim that this is their argument, that he bought the money, he sent the money to one of his ladies who worked for him, and apparently she was having problems with paying rent or what have you. And he went to the Western Union to wire the money. And so there's a ticket exactly at what moment he sent the money. And then he left the dog in the car, went down into the police station and shot Ruby. But it's my contention, he'd been stalking Ruby the whole weekend. Can you comment?
Ruby had been stalking Oswald from the beginning, yes. We have photographs of him from the midnight press conference. We have photographs of him in the hallway with reporters all weekend long until Ruby shot Oswald. I wrote a book some years ago. It was my 7th book on the assassination. It was called The Search for Lee Harvey Oswald. And in it, I published pictures of Ruby in the basement 15 minutes before he was supposed to even be there. He was supposed to have been sending the telegram. Yes, a telegram was sent. Yes, it was time-stamped, but nobody ever checked to see if the timestamp was correct, number one, and nobody ever was able to find out whether or not it was actually Ruby or somebody else who sent the money. We don't know. That was a good excuse, though, to say that it wasn't premeditated. The same thing happened with leaving the dog, Sheba, in the car. That if he'd have left it with somebody else or a dog sitter or whatever, it would show premeditation. And the concept of a defense was that it was not premeditated at all. So, yes, why did he leave one of his 2 dachshunds in his apartment and bring the other one with him, and then not bring the dog in or do something else with it? The concept was that would have been the defense for premeditation.
We had a speaker here a number of years ago, and one of his claims was that whomever were the people behind the killings, were out after Vice President Johnson as well, and when they found out that Vice President Johnson was not hit, they were furious. Comments?
Back in the 1970s, I came up with a concept. And the concept related to the fact that Governor Connolly was also shot 3 times, actually. They said once, but it was 3 times. And my concept related to the constant question, was he hit on purpose or was it an accident? We don't really know. It looks like it was an accident, that whoever was shooting at President Kennedy hit Connolly 3 times and just, whoops. The concept, though, is this. And this was what I came up with. And years later, somebody found out I had come up with that and started to publish a book based on the theory. And the theory was this. Oswald had absolutely no reason to want to kill President Kennedy. Everyone who knew him said he admired President Kennedy and always spoke well of him. However, when Oswald was in the Soviet Union, he had had a dishonorable discharge from the Marine Corps, and he wanted to have it updated. And he wrote from the Soviet Union to the Secretary of the Navy, and asked to have it upgraded. And the Secretary of the Navy wrote back and said, "I'm sorry, I'm no longer the secretary, and I can't help you." Well, the man who had been the secretary and the one who got the letter was, in fact, John Connally. So the concept is that he could have been hit on purpose, and the concept would be that he was trying to kill Governor Connally and hit the president by mistake. Between the photographs and the films, I've released, 14 films and almost 2,000 photographs through the years. The Warren Commission released only a total of 12 on their own. They had access to all of these and suppressed them all. Now, as I mentioned in the book, I published 1,000 most important photographs in the case, and several hundred have never been published before. So anyway, I'm happy to see people still caring about what happened and showing up for presentations like that. On the 22nd, which is my birthday, ironically, I will be in Dealey Plaza along with several other speakers, and we have a memorial to President Kennedy, and I've done it every year since. If you'd like to come, please, you're welcome.
This question has been received from our virtual audience. I understand that you moved to Dallas to pursue your work surrounding the assassination. Are you still in Dallas, and what has been your experience of the aftermath of the JFK assassination as a Dallasite?
Yes, 1995, I moved down here from Pennsylvania because I felt there needed to be a voice of reason. We had two situations in Dallas. Number one was the cover-up, the Sixth Floor Museum and the official view of the city, especially an organization called Downtown Dallas, Inc., which controls everything. And then we had a couple of people that were selling really low-quality newspapers that were telling the truth but not being very convincing. And I felt there needed to be a voice of reason down here. So I moved down and been down here ever since. I'm down here now for 27 years, almost 28.
Well, you almost talk like a Texan.
Ah, damn.
Any questions from the audience? Come on down. We have to speak into the microphone. While he's coming down, I'm going to ask my final question, and then I'm going to, as they say, throw it open to the delegates. Our mutual friend swears that Jack Ruby introduced her to Lee Harvey Oswald at his club 2 or 3 weeks before the assassination, and she's a smart cookie and can remember a face from 1,000 years ago. Can you comment on that?
The lady you're talking about was in Dealey Plaza. She actually filmed the assassination. The FBI confiscated the film, and she's never seen it. We have never seen it. It's the only known film of the assassination that we have not seen.
And what's sad, it's from the other side of the street.
Right. She was standing directly across the street, and she was one of the closest half-dozen witnesses to the assassination. And she saw the shot fired from the grassy knoll. And I've interviewed her, and she's on. I have a DVD, which we did not bring with us today, but which is available, and we'll have it in the plaza. She said exactly where she said the shot came from, and she points exactly to where the House Committee acoustics people found out that that's where the shot came from.
I keep saying last little question, but I had a personal conversation with Dr. Robert McClellan, and he grew up in Athens, Texas. And he grew up at a time where all Texas boys learned how to shoot guns so they could hit rabbits and squirrels to help feed their family, you know, in the Depression and war years. So he knew a lot about guns. So when he said he was convinced of where the bullet entered and exited, I'm not saying he was the only one, but I can guarantee you he was one who knew about guns and shotguns and rifles and so forth.
Yeah. Dr. McClelland was one of the very first doctors to come, actually the very first one to come forward and admit what actually happened. I, through the years, interviewed on videotape over 20 of the doctors, and the medical people were absolutely consistent that the fatal shot came from the right front and blew out the back of the president's head. In my book, I've got the testimony and statements of 88 witnesses. They couldn't all have been wrong. We're supposed to believe that they were.
Did Wagner Carr, who was Attorney General of the state of Texas at the time, did he ever, in his report, did he have anything to add to the body of the knowledge of the assassination, or was it basically a reflection of the Warren Commission?
Virtually every official statement that was ever given by him or anybody else was that the Warren Commission was right and Oswald acted alone. With all the evidence that Oswald wasn't even up there, and there were several witnesses that proved that, it seems ridiculous to assume that he did. But they were assuming that Oswald was guilty because he had been set up before the assassination ever took place. Oswald had worked for the CIA. The proof of that's in the book. The head of the CIA, in response to a request from the head of the Secret Service, responded and said, yes, Oswald was trained by us. Of course, the government still denies it.
As I recall, that the person Oswald was calling in North Carolina had trained David Ferrie as a pilot. Yes, sir. Thanks for your patience. I can't help myself sometimes.
No problem. That's what happens in Texas, right? Jacob Jimenez, thank you for being so dedicated for all these 28 years. I appreciate that. And I grew fascinated when I was like 10 years old. My parents actually, I'm from San Antonio originally. They drove me to Dallas to come to Dealey Plaza. My wife thinks I'm crazy. Live here now.
Can you stand a little closer?
Sure.
There you go.
Better? Okay.
Perfect.
So I got 3 questions. First off, why? We kind of alluded to that at the beginning of the conversation. Why did they kill JFK? Secondly, why Dallas? And what are your thoughts on President Biden closing up, again, research into the papers and not sealing them up again?
Okay, the reason why depends on who. The most logical answer as to who killed the president is the Covert Actions Branch of the CIA and organized crime. Why the CIA? The president was ending the war in Vietnam, which was the CIA's war. They were making a fortune off the war, and they wanted to continue because it was giving them a lot of power. The president was going to end the war immediately. He made it known, he announced it, that as soon as the next election in '64 took place, he was going to withdraw. They hated that. Organized crime, however, had a similar reason, and that is that Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, and his brother, the President, John Kennedy, were fighting the only effective war in this nation's history against organized crime. That war stopped the day of the assassination. Why Dallas? Because Dallas was controllable. Lyndon Johnson had a lot of power here. The city itself was extremely right-wing. It was a good place where they had control. Second of all, if you were a movie producer and you wanted to do a scene of the assassination of a president or anybody else, you could not come out with a more effective or believable point than Dealey Plaza. You've got the points of Crossfire, which are easily forgotten and not paid attention to. And they got Oswald the job in the depository. That's in the document as well. If anyone is interested in learning about the truth about what happened, all I can say is we don't have all the answers, but we have a lot more than they ever wanted us to.
I might add to you that wasn't President Kennedy in San Antonio to open up a building at the Kelly Air Force Base? in San Antonio, and San Antonio gave President Kennedy a rousing reception. But I believe he was there to dedicate some building at the base there.
I don't remember. I don't remember exactly why he was there, but the concept was to go to as many places in Texas as he could. Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Houston, Austin, the LBJ Ranch, which of course he didn't get a chance to get to, but that was the idea. He was supposed to be starting his campaign for 1964.
Since you were so patient with me, do you have any more questions? Come on down.
Oh,
the Biden question.
Yeah. Okay. Last week, President Biden held up the release of the balance of the materials that were withheld by the Warren Commission. He did it because he wanted to make sure that there's nobody who could be damaged or hurt by this, someone who might still be alive or relatives to those people. And he wanted to have further investigation of those issues. However, 3 years ago, everything was supposed to be released because of the Assassination Records Review Board law, the law that was passed federally. And they started to release the materials, and Trump stopped them. He just stopped them dead. No explanation, just stopped them. It's for 3 years. Well, the 3 years is now up. And according to President Biden, the stuff shall all be released by next December. I personally don't believe that all the answers are there. Nobody's going to write a paper saying, "Hey, just for history, we did it." It's not going to happen. But people expect that that's going to be the case. We know that there was more than one shooter. We know that the government, elements of the government, covered it up. Will we ever know the whole truth? I don't know. Back in 1988, I released a book called High Treason, which was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And in that book, I released statements by the Dallas doctors and the autopsy photographs that said that the autopsy photographs they were shown were faked, and that that what they all saw was the back of the head gone. I thought for sure that would get the case totally reopened and solved. It didn't. The powers that be have enough power to cover this stuff up, whereby we're not going to hear it all, maybe even when the stuff is released. We know that the Secret Service burned all of their files when they were supposed to turn it over to the Assassinations Review Board.
Oh, I heard that was an accident. Go ahead.
I had a teacher when I was at Texas Tech in the 90s, and she was on the grassy knoll as a 3-year-old when Kennedy was shot, and she was on her dad's shoulders, and he was a police officer, and he was videoing, and they confiscated her family's video, which included her birthday party. So she was very resentful about that, even in the 90s. My question is, how many videos or recordings did they end up confiscating during the assassination? And then how many shots were there? I counted 5 during the video.
Okay. Both questions are good ones, to say the least. #1, how many films were there that were confiscated? We don't know. At least 2, at least. Beverly Oliver's film was one. A fellow by the name of Gordon Arnold was another one. In the plaza, one of the shooters or people from behind the stockade fence came around and demanded his film. They wanted the camera too, but it was his mother's camera. He wasn't going to give that away. So he took the film out of the camera and they exposed it to light. And so there's that one, those 2. I have seen other pictures in the plaza, including somebody standing in the doorway of the depository who was also filming. We don't know. There could be many more. Legendarily, there's about a dozen. That could have been one of them. We don't know how many there were. I wish we did. I wish we could see them all.
Like, how many have you seen?
Have I had? I've released over 20 of them.
I might follow up. I've known 2 people, just in my little world, One of them spoke up here once for a few minutes. His father worked for the Dallas Times-Herald, and he was there in the plaza taking pictures on the behalf of the Times-Herald. And he literally had left the Dallas Times-Herald studios and walked over to take pictures of the parade. That Monday morning, somebody came in to the studios, the Times-Herald studios, and said, "We want those pictures," and showed badges and so forth. Well, in those days, you just handed it over. They never saw the pictures again. And another person was Eamon Kennedy. He was a Times-Herald photographer as well, but he was at Dallas Love Field taking pictures. And he took the last standalone picture of President Kennedy ever. And it's also on YouTube. And he said the same thing. They came in to steal his photographs, but he did something all photographers do. He kept the negatives at home or in a third plate, at grandma's house. And so he let them have it, but he kept everything that they took. So to answer your question, a lot of folks that we'll never know.
I was in California testifying in a trial some years back, and a fellow who was a photographer at the arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald, we have seen a few of his things. He took still photographs and a 16 millimeter film. It's the only film taken inside the Texas Theater. He told me he had a lot more that had never seen the light of day. I said, well, I'd love to see him. I never heard from him again.
Did we answer all your questions? How about you? I figured if you have the courage to come down here and ask, we've got to make sure your question's answered.
I have something else kind of cool. That same teacher, she was roommates with Oswald's daughter.
Wow.
At UT, and they looked similar. And so whenever the anniversary came up, they would have, like, I guess CIA or FBI, someone come and protect them, and they had to stay in their dorm room for that week. So she was a great history teacher.
I bet she was. I bet she was. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
The thing is, there are very few teachers that have the nerve to be able to stop and tell the truth, because many of the school districts and whatever refuse to allow it. We've come across that all the time.
Two questions. Why did the Secret Service leave Oswald out of the school book depository? And over in Oak Cliff, was it speculated that somebody was going to get him out of the area, and it didn't happen?
Oswald, I feel, was never supposed to leave the depository alive. When the police ran into the depository, I think they were supposed to kill him. He got out, so now they had a problem. The problem was Oswald was alive and could defend himself. And they found very soon that enough people had seen him where he wasn't supposed to be, according to the official fiction. Oswald was actually arrested at the Texas Theater because they knew where he was going to be. If you examine in the book or anywhere else the issues about Oswald and his working for the government, and you go back to, even if it's just motion picture films or whatever stories, if you're a spy and you have got to meet somebody, whether you're a handler or somebody else to give information to, one of the most perfect places to do it in is a theater, a movie theater. It's dark. You can sit wherever you want to. No one can photograph or see you. Oswald ended up at the Texas Theater. A man named John Calvin Brewer called the police and said that he saw Oswald sneak into the theater. Well, from where he was standing at the Hardy shoe store down the street, it would be virtually impossible to see anybody sneaking into the theater. My wife Janet has come up with the idea of trying to go to the original spots and figure out photographically whether it was at all physically possible for him to do it. It's an interesting concept.
That's how Perry Mason worked it. He went to the spots. Did we answer your question, sir? Since there's nobody questions, come on down. Don't be bashful. While she's coming down, I'm going to ask this question. I confronted the Secret Service one time. They had they had somebody given their line on what happened that day, and I said, "Why was the state of Texas law violated by the Secret Service?" And he looked at me and says, "What law?" And I said, "Well, the state of Texas requires an autopsy on all murders in this state. And you didn't let the state of Texas law be implemented." And he gave me a glare like I was fixing to get arrested and didn't answer the question. So save that one while this lady's here.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name's Mary Rose DeCordova. I have a couple questions for you. The first one is, given your career as an investigative reporter, author, digging in places with our government that people don't want to talk about, have you ever had threats on your life?
Back in 1983, and there's a chapter on that in the book, my house was firebombed in Pennsylvania. And no, that was in New Jersey, actually. I've been attacked in Dealey Plaza half a dozen times. I've been thrown in jail by the Dallas police. The Sixth Floor Museum actually called the authorities. Which one was that? Yeah, thanks. Homeland Security to come and arrest me because I was a terrorist.
He looks like one, doesn't he?
Seriously, it was kind of weird because they showed up in their gray outfits with Homeland Security written on them, and they had machine guns. Another thing that happened, which I feel I should mention, is some years ago, five researchers in the Kennedy case were on the grassy knoll, and we're talking to each other, and all of a sudden this really noxious fume just came over us. And what it was people from the city of Dallas, Parks Department, were spraying us with a noxious chemical called chlorpyrifos, which was very soon thereafter made illegal. Trump made it legal again. But for years and years it wasn't legal. 5 of us ended up in the hospital. 1 died. And I threatened to sue the city because of it. And we had a judge who really wouldn't even allow the evidence into court and threw the whole thing out, including the murder of somebody else. I was in the hospital for 2 days. So, yes, I've been attacked in Dealey Plaza with a hunting knife, with a baseball bat, with a piece of wood, and with a folding chair. So, yeah.
Well, I admire your pursuit of truth. And my second question is around a story that you don't hear about with Marina. And I've read she's still in the area. And I've been surprised, just as a citizen of Dallas, that she would want to be here, given, everything that's happened here. And her daughters, I guess, are still also here. So my question is, have you interviewed her, met her? What is the state of her life and her involvement, with the fact finding that you've done? Can you give us a little bit of a snippet of where she's at today and kind of her life?
Sure. Marina lives in Rockwall, and she married again sometime later, and she's still with her husband now. Ken is his name. And she's just very, very bitter about all this. Some years ago, she and I were both speaking at a college in Connecticut. It was Harvard, actually. And I had breakfast with her, and we spent about 2 hours together. And I asked her about the famous backyard pictures of Oswald holding the rifle. And she said, I didn't take those pictures. She said, I took some pictures, but those are not the ones. And she told me that she was taking at the foot of the stairs, photographing toward the alleyway. Well, the ones that we see now were taken from the alleyway, looking toward the stairs. She said she did not take those pictures. But, you know, on and on and on, we have this sort of thing. She's very, very angry. I met the daughters, both of them, once when we were making the movie JFK. In the movie, I actually was chief consultant on the film and played 4 roles in the movie, and nobody caught it. Anyway, the thing is that I met them at a scene we were shooting at Love Field, and they're all very nice. It's just that their lives were ruined by the shadow of saying that their father was the assassin of the president. They know he didn't do it.
By the way, Mary's husband's great-great-grandfather is one of the greatest cartographers that America ever had, Decker Dova. Tell us about the, did we answer all your questions?
Yes, I had one other quick question, and it's really about, you know, for someone who's done so much work that you've done, if you had to pick one thing in your career that you'd like to uncover moving forward that you can't control with our government, that you'd like to know about this story, about the assassination, what would it be?
Who pulled the triggers? That's what I would say.
Then who paid them?
Theoretically, it's the same thing when you think about it. Those responsible. The 2 things that I've done in the history of the case that I'm proudest of is releasing the Zapruder film to the public, and the others too. Nix, much more, Bell Hughes, Towner Dorman, Pascal, all of them. We do have a DVD, not with us, but it's for sale. We'll have it in the plaza. And it's a collection of everything that exists, 22 separate films. Anyway, I'm proudest of releasing the Zapruder film and releasing the color autopsy photographs as well. You know, if I hadn't done that, neither of them would be out now because the government was never going to allow it. I was just very lucky, and you know, what can I say? You know, my reward is that in Dealey Plaza, I met my wife, and we were married in the Dealey Plaza 2 years ago today.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
I love you, baby.
Come on down.
Thank you so much.
While she's coming down, can you address the issue about the autopsy? How the Secret Service didn't do...
Oh, yeah. By Texas law, if somebody is murdered or killed in the city or the state, by law, the autopsy has to be performed here. Lyndon Johnson gave the order to get the president the hell out of here. And the Secret Service, under the objections of the powers that be, the actual medical people who were supposed to be doing it, at gunpoint removed the president's body and prevented it from being an honest autopsy. A friend of mine, his name was Harold Weisberg, he was one of the key original researchers in the Kennedy case, made the statement that Lee Harvey Oswald was given the autopsy of a king. President Kennedy was given the autopsy of a Bowery bum. It was grossly inaccurate and so much stuff. It was a military autopsy done by the Department of the Army under the control of the CIA, and there were something like 34 items that need to be done, must be done in a military autopsy that were not done.
And if the autopsy had been done in Dallas County, the man who would have done it had done thousands of autopsies. Yes, ma'am.
By the way, the two people that were involved in doing the actual autopsy had never done a gunshot autopsy in their lives.
And this is the President of the United States. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
So how is the murder of the police officer, J.D. Tippit, linked to Oswald? And who killed J.D. Tippit? I mean,
we don't know who killed J.D. Tippit. Nobody knows. Based on the witnesses, there was more than one person involved in it. Every one of them said it was not Lee Harvey Oswald. The concept was one that was brought up by the Dallas police and the FBI. And the concept essentially is this. It's circular reasoning. Since Lee Harvey Oswald shot Officer Tippit, therefore he shot President Kennedy. That's their logic. The fact is that Oswald had with him, when he was arrested, a .38 caliber revolver. The bullet shells that were found at the scene of the crime, of the Tippit killing, were from an automatic, a totally different weapon. But that all changed. When the bullets were the bullet shells were found, they were scribed with initials of the police officer that found it. The ones that are in evidence now do not have the scribing, and they're a different type of bullet shells.
Does that answer your question?
yeah.
Thank you.
Did you have a question in the back?
I think it's fair to say that you are probably America's preeminent conspiracy theorist at this point in time. Do you feel any affinity to the what's going on in Dealey Plaza now with QAnon?
It's disturbing, not just the QAnon thing, but occasionally, if anybody has any kind of a grievance or wants to give any kind of a demonstration, of all places, they pick Dealey Plaza again and again and again. It brings a great deal of shame to the fact that it's allowed in the first place. There's no reason in the world why they can't give any kind of demonstration anywhere else. City Hall would be a great place. Doing it during the week, that might be covered by the press. But they always pick weekends, always pick Dealey Plaza. And it's just very, very disturbing. Yes.
Do you think there's part of that legacy of the Kennedy assassination that feeds into that?
Well, the concept is very, very strange. The reporting that went on about the demonstrations is that they were expecting John Kennedy Jr. to come back to life, show up in Dealey Plaza, and change from a Democrat to a Republican and be the vice president in 2024. I mean, the whole thing is absurd. It's ridiculous. It's insane. But what it does is it hurts people who are honest researchers in the Kennedy case and makes everybody look like an assassination freak.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I guess I come at this from a slightly different perspective, but in your view, do you view Oswald as a sociopath or psychopath or anything like that?
No. The question, for those who may not have heard it, is, was Lee Harvey Oswald a psychopath? The answer to that is no. I mean, he was in the Marine Corps. He was given several medical tests, as are all Marines and soldiers.
Well, was he a sociopath?
He was a sociopath? No. The thing is, Lee Harvey Oswald is presented to us as this idiot with crazy tendencies and like that.
And the CIA is not known to hire idiots.
Yeah, well, the thing is that Oswald had a 140 IQ. He was not a dummy at all. When he was in the Marine Corps, they taught him to speak fluent Russian, which is extremely difficult. But he spoke with such proficiency that people in the Soviet Union thought he was a native from there. Oswald was trained by the CIA for specific purposes. Russia was one of them. Cuba was another. He had allegedly attempted to go to Cuba, and it didn't work out. And he came back to Dallas, was given the job by the CIA at the book depository, and the rest is history.
I guess I have another different kind of thing, maybe not necessarily related to the assassination, but are you surprised in any way that there haven't been more assassinations? I mean, or just assassination just as American as apple pie? I mean, I know that sounds...
Well, there's been 3 attempts. There were 2 attempts on President Ford and then one on President Reagan.
Yeah. What I mean is, why haven't there been any in recent years?
Well, no, those are the last ones, the ones against Gerald Ford and George Bush. The thing is,
Reagan.
Was there any connection between them? We don't know. There may have been.
I mean, what I'm saying is, doesn't it happen every few years, you know, that kind of thing?
Well, first of all, the Secret Service now keeps the president in a pretty, because I've been around several presidents over the last 20 years, and you have to walk through this thing, and they pat you down and check for guns and so forth. I mean, it's pretty thorough.
All the protection of the presidents has changed since John Kennedy was killed. The car itself was taken to the Ford plant in Dearborn, Michigan, and they redid the whole thing. Originally it was presidential blue, midnight blue. Now they painted it black. They welded on a personal hard top, a permanent hard top. They changed the tires from regular tires to aluminum tires that if they were shot wouldn't deflate. Things of that nature. They put anti-bomb metal on the bottom of the car. The car weighed an absolute ton, several tons actually. And it had a very, very powerful engine and all. And the thing is, it wasn't pulled out of service. It was kept in to service for years and years to come. Johnson and all the rest that followed him. It was Gerald Ford who wouldn't ride in it.
Have a question here?
How was the shooting of the general tied to Oswald a couple weeks before the assassination here in Dallas?
Okay, some shots were taken at General Edwin Walker, who was the exact opposite of President Kennedy, politically, morally, what have you. And we are told it was Oswald who fired at General Walker. The problem is that Oswald has only been linked to one rifle, and it was a different caliber than the bullets found at the Walker shooting. There's very little way of believing that whoever shot General Walker was the same one who shot at the president. There's no logic to it. The other problem is that Oswald, who didn't drive, we assumed that he brought a rifle on a public bus to the shooting and then brought it back away again, and nobody cared. None of it makes any sense. There was a witness who said that there were 2 people involved in the Walker shooting, and neither one of them was Oswald. Same sort of thing with Officer Tippit. There were something like, I think, 12 separate witnesses. Every one of them said it was not Oswald until after Oswald was killed, and then 2 or 3 of them changed their story. On and on.
I'm going to close this with the last little comment. I have a friend of mine, and he's still alive, but he was in the mafia for years when Vegas was mafia. And he, as he said, he won't ever talk about it because once you're in the mafia, you're always in the mafia. Even though he's been divorced from them for 40 years, he still won't talk. But what he will say is that we don't keep diaries, we don't keep letters, we don't keep any kind of contracts. And so we've had 500 years of experience of covering our tracks. That was his comment to the assassination.
And here we've got every alleged assassin ever having 3 names: Lee Harvey Oswald, Sirhan Bashir Sirhan, James Earl Ray, on and on and on. And they all keep diaries. The exact opposite of what the professionals actually do.
Thank you so much, Robert Groden.